Welcome everybody to this webinar. Today we're going to talk about cybersecurity in the age of AI, vulnerabilities and how to address them. I am Carsten Kraus, founder of CDO Times, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. So setting the stage, right? The cybersecurity landscape is evolving at an unprecedented pace. We see that at CDO Times, one of my CDO Times executives on the call here. So we talk about this, we monitor this, and we have some great experts on here to talk about AI threats on the rise and security teams stretched thin. Executives have to really think how they approach risk management. And today we want to explore how AI is both a weapon and a shield in cybersecurity. Right. So I am super excited to be joined by some of the sharpest minds in cybersecurity, including Trey Ford. He's the CISO and customer advisor at BugCrowd. He's an industry veteran with deep expertise in vulnerability management, ethical hacking, and cybersecurity strategy. Then I'm also joined here, already stole his thunder, by Boris Wisniewski. He's a CTO, a chief architect, and also a CDO Times fractional executive. He's a technology leader that specializes in AI-driven security solutions, architecture, and cyber risk management. And then Jack Lopez, he's the global VP at BugCrowd, and he's a expert in security partnerships and enterprise security programs. So thank you so much for all of you for being here. Let's dive into the latest data on AI-driven security risks. So I thought I'd share some of the research that we're doing at your Times research. The stakes have really never been higher. The cost of data breaches now is skyrocketing. In a recent report, IBM Security found that average breach costs hits $4.45 million. That's a 15% increase over the last 3 years. Of course, that's just an average. As we know, you can have a lot more damage done, both from a cost perspective, from a reputational damage perspective. There's a lot of things to consider here. The other part that I've seen is that still unpatched vulnerabilities, 54% of organizations cite that that's their biggest concern, but only 49% scan once or on a weekly basis or less. In some of the reporting, some said never, which I hope was a joke. But and then AI-powered cybersecurity adoption is growing, right? There's a lot of capabilities with generative AI. We used, quite frankly, in cybersecurity for a while. 35% of enterprises are still not using AI for security. And so that leaves them vulnerable to AI-driven attacks, because you got to bring the same weapons and fight the bad guys. So these numbers tell us that enterprises must adopt continuous monitoring, AI-driven defenses, and proactive vulnerability management, right? And so falling behind in that is something you just can't afford. So why don't we do a quick round here from the panelists to what you currently see in the market and what's evolving here, what are concerns and solutions that you've seen that people are talking about. Maybe start from the top left, the way I see it. Boris, you want to go first?
Yes, so to answer the question, Carsten, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to meet Trey and Jack and the audience that's attending this call. I wanted to share with you a little bit of context. So my professional pathway started with cybersecurity, led to data science, earlier incarnations of cognitive computing, for those of who are familiar with IBM Watson, back to cybersecurity, implementing some of the earlier counter-fraud, AI-assisted counter-fraud type of the solutions, and back to AI, now ChatGPT AI. So I would take a second to expand a little bit, Carsten, on your introduction. So when we are discussing AI and cybersecurity, there are two different facets that are actually interrelated. So one facet is how do we protect AI application, AI-assisted solutions. I think this topic is going to be secondary in conversation today, and we're going to focus more on AI-assisted cybersecurity solutions. So not necessarily focusing on specific vendors, but I wanted to highlight a couple of areas before I pass the torch to Trace and Jack, and that is in AI-assisted cybersecurity, there are two, let's say, three important trends that I wanted to highlight. Most of the quote-unquote legacy cybersecurity companies do offer today AI-assisted solutions. Some of these solutions are actually rapidly evolving and emerging into the AI-assisted full-featured cybersecurity platforms. So that's a positive sign. On the other hand, the cybersecurity vendor landscape, if we look at DevSecOps, continuous DevSecOps life cycle, most of the vendors and providers in that landscape, DevSecOps landscape, they have overlapping set of features. So the second area of conversation and consideration is how companies and procurement department of those companies can deconflict and optimize this set of overlapping features and the fact that all of the cybersecurity vendors claim that they offer AI-assisted capabilities. The third area, which may be of interest to discuss, may not later in conversation we can touch on it, is that private equity company played an important role in beefing up and building their technology and cybersecurity portfolios of holding companies. Mm-hmm. And now we have an environment where there are large hyperscalers that offer very robust set of AI-assisted cybersecurity solutions. But on the other hand, some of the private equity companies made very important and meaningful acquisitions, and they're rapidly evolving the capabilities of the companies that they acquired. So that's an important consideration. And that creates that, deconflicting optimization of cybersecurity vendor portfolio question very interesting. And the third item, and I'm going to pass it to Trey and Jack, is cybersecurity for a long time been acknowledged to be as a team sport. And in earlier days, cybersecurity as a team sport was team sport of humans. Now it's team sport of humans and AI, where AI becomes an important member of your cybersecurity team. And how do you leverage and what features you can rely on AI to guard, and where the role of humans becomes indispensable. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the top of the mind highlights and areas to focus on.
That was quite a good list of topics, and we will talk about most of them, I hope. And so maybe let's pass over the torch to Trey, give us a little bit of perspective of what you're seeing and what's happening in the marketplace.
Sure, absolutely. So first, thanks for having me on. Excited to connect with you and the crew here. Great to meet you as well, Boris. When I think about AI, I mean, we've been dealing with expert systems for a long time. I mean, this was basically good computer, bad computer. You get a stick or a carrot. Like, we've been tuning expert systems for a long time. The fraud detection has been there for a long time. You think about the number of silly times your credit card's been locked when you're traveling, when you're out of state, when you're buying something online. Completely rational, but it's come to the point where our moms or dads, our kids are able to play with this stuff. It's available on their phone. But what we're not thinking is about where that data lives. Like, when we take a big step back, when we think about communicating with AI, when you're talking to Siri, when you're talking to Alexa, when you're interacting with ChatGPT, I want you to think about this as, I don't know, Jimmy Neutron boy genius. You've got a 5-year-old that's capable of reading, understanding, and contextualizing what they're reading. I have this question. Go read the Library of Congress and tell me about these 3 topics. They can't tell you how to do anything with it. It's going to infer really crazy things. It'll hallucinate like a 5-year-old will. You can ask it and provide boundaries for, hey, here's bounds of how I want you to answer, how I want you to frame, maybe give me an answer in iambic pentameter. Like there's all crazy fun things we can bound the guidance that we give these models. But the implementation of the models is also just as important. So on the commercial aspects, when we're talking about enterprises using these technologies, so the superscalers can host various models, the frontier models, all the different size models. You can use commercial versions where you're not sharing any of the training data, or you can build a platform that's going to use and RAG your own data and then start answering questions. Now, one, you can establish boundaries on what you've trained the platform on, what data you've provided it access to or fed to the system. But you're going to lose this notion of role-based or identity-based access control. You're losing attributes on what that looks like. So if HR is fed a whole bunch of information in, because we're trying to normalize payment bands based upon your role in the organization, if you're on the individual contributor versus the management track, those sorts of things. And then Boris goes in and says, "Hey, how am I getting paid in contrast to this group, knowing that there are 5 people in the group?" He now has a binary answer with a range and knows exactly where he is on that payment band. AI is just doing its job and answering a question. But what we've done is now informed a very litigious and very sensitive dialogue that we have to answer for as a business. And so that is a really bad test or trial balloon. Kind of informs how we're thinking about this, the enterprise side. Where does the data live? Where does it go? Now, if we go the other side and say, okay, we're just going to use public models, we're going to allow our employees to jump in, feed information to ChatGPT. Hey, help me come up with a great answer to this NDA protected, I don't know, RFP or call for papers or whatever else. We're now leaking information into a platform we don't control. And that's where we start seeing questions around, okay, sure, you could use Anthropic, use OpenAI. There's different conversations about DeepSeek and its sovereignty and its location, but that there's so many different facets to decompose these different uses. We have to think about the prompts, the information we're loading in. When we're running our own models, we have to think about how to protect our model weights, our training, the data we fed into it, all these different aspects. This is a lot different than classical application security. And that's before we get into the diversity and the inclusion and the other population sensitivities where we need to protect people. So there's a lot here. There's a lot of surface area to explore, but I think this is going to be phenomenal in terms of allowing really smart people wherever they are to increase the value they provide. I don't think it's going to put jobs at risk. I think it's going to increase the value that we can provide as humans using cognitive abilities to manage human bias and a bunch of other stuff. There's a lot here. I'm looking forward to tearing into this.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. NVIDIA's CEO Jensen Huang was saying that there's not. You have to see more this way that 50% of our tasks will be automated by AI, so we can focus on the other 50%. So it's not like we're getting replaced; we're just getting superhuman powers, right? And on top of that. And then some of the things that you were talking about reminded me of a discussion I had with one of my clients at Campbell's, where we were looking at, what do we do? How does AI models, how can they train on our data? So when you look at an AI ethics council, we were talking about, we need to have a security policy for external AI use, for internal, usage. So we came up with multiple scenarios. So there's so many fields of the running to go through there. So Jack, what are you seeing? What are you hearing from customers that you bump into, challenges that they're facing, and where they need help?
Yeah, I think the angle I can approach this from is what we're seeing in the market as far as how people are looking at AI and addressing it. Our reseller community is looking at it in multiple ways, and they're using it themselves. They're also reselling security technologies that are leveraging AI, and they're also performing services around addressing the threat that AI serves in the sense that it makes it very easy for some threat actors to achieve certain ways that they'll attack organizations. I think, ironically, I'll look at this from the human side as far as where this kind of fits into the model. AI in the market's really viewed in three ways, as I see it. One is AI as an enabler, which we've talked a little bit about. What can it do to enhance security products? What can it do to enhance Trey's job in that sense? How can he get more out of his team? How can they then, to your point, Carson, spend 50% of the other time focused on the correct things that humans need to address? That's a very, very important part of AI as far as people look at it, but it opens itself up to the other two parts, which is, as I said, how is AI being used as a threat? How are those people that used to be script kiddies out there that could go and download bits of code now using AI to go and perform cross-site scripting attacks on websites out there and just chase after that in the easiest fashion possible with very little background on how to do it. The other thing is the security of the AI itself. And I think there's two facets in my mind around this. There's the security of the AI. What could be compromised within the AI? What could somebody accomplish? Could they hack a chatbot and then get to the back end of that and somehow navigate into someone's network in that fashion? The other angle on this is, and Trey mentioned this a bit, the hallucination, the bias, the knowledge that comes out of this. And I would argue that this is not just a security challenge, this is a business challenge from this standpoint, because bad data into an AI that interprets it incorrectly, that provides information used for decisions for the business can be a real issue. And it's not just a security thing, it's about the actual quality of the AI. So checking for AI bias testing and understanding what the challenges are within the structure of those LLMs and how they might be used is really critical. One other quote I've heard recently from Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, I think is fantastic, is just that departments will become the HR departments of AI agents in the future. And I think Trey and I can have some conversations around this, but I think it's a polemic statement. And it puts IT in an interesting spot that opens up for some discussion as well. So beyond that, just looking to approach this from the standpoint of how AI is being approached commercially with our partners at this point.
Yeah, no, I think the landscape is rapidly evolving. Even, Boris and I will write and research about this like and Trey, I'm sure too. It's hard to keep up with all these new things that are happening. I've been tell this story on conferences, right? I've been called by a sales agent that was not a human and that didn't indicate that she was not human. And so I basically told her, I think you're not human. She tricked me for a while, but it's very interesting how this is all evolving. And from an architecture perspective and cybersecurity perspective, what are some frameworks that we can use? There's the NIST AI risk management framework that I've been looking at for a little bit, and combining that with traditional architecture, TOGAF methods, and whatever. But this need to keep on learning. Now maybe I pass to the audience, maybe a quick poll to see what AI-driven attack vector concerns you the most. So launch a quick poll, and hopefully you can vote on that so we can all understand what you guys are standing. So the poll should be with you guys now. I know we panelists can't see it until you answer it. Keep on voting.
While the vote's coming in, I got a couple of questions that I can pick up. So Nathan, you asked questions about running DeepSeek in an air-gapped environment. In theory, and I want to say in theory as a specific worldview, I don't believe that air gaps are an end-all be-all. We have those challenges in the ICS SCADA universe, but running DeepSeek or any questionable code in a constrained environment is always wise. I guess your question is worrying about phoning home. In theory, you've got it contained. I mean, you've got code coming from a sovereignty source that you can't trust. You haven't validated. We don't have all the testing and visibility in. It's a newer model, newer entrant. So running that air gapped makes a whole lot of sense. But I wouldn't be worried about it phoning home if you've got that fully isolated. But I'd be definitely monitoring.
All right, so I kind of shared the, I think not everybody voted, but we have AI deepfakes, AI automated malware, AI powered phishing, some of the attack vectors that folks are worried about. So, so moving on to panel discussion. So we talked about how AI is both for cyber offense and defense. It's a revolution, right? And what are the most advanced AI-driven attack methods that you have seen, and how can organizations practically defend them against them? I don't know, Trey, have you seen some themes here?
I appreciate the super scalers that have been posting information about adversarial use of Gen AI, and I think Google was probably one of the more one of my more preferred reports. They broke down some of the work coming from international actors, of course, threat groups that the intelligence community watches closely. And I'll underscore that AI is not the source of ingenuity. Again, go back to Jimmy Neutron, boy genius. Yeah, clever, using stuff that's available, but again, a 5-year-old. So when you start thinking about how our adversaries are going to use AI, it's going to, just like marketing, write better emails. It's helping our developers write code and troubleshoot their code, bug hunt. That's a great thing. But it's doing things that you know how to do, but do best when you're focused. And it doesn't get tired. It doesn't need a break, doesn't need to sleep, doesn't need to eat. It doesn't lose focus. So what it's doing is accelerating a lot of these workflows. So when you look at Iran, they're using it for phishing campaigns and OS intelligence on defense targets and that sort of research. China, their actors appear to be using it more for recon, scripting, and code development. Sounds like our engineering organizations in the corporate space. Troubleshooting, they're getting guidance on lateral movement and privilege escalation, your classic attacker lifecycle behaviors. North Korea is using this for resume development and interview prep and organizational research. And so we've dealt a lot with synthetic identities, applying to jobs and landing jobs inside of Western organizations. So coming in under synthetic assumed identities and accepting jobs and getting access to our infrastructure and, providing some value, but collecting all kinds of learnings and that sort of thing. So I think one of the things I'm most concerned about isn't the deep fake from I enjoyed seeing Biden and Trump dance together and all the kinds of fun stuff we see. But in terms of how do we identity proof is going to be increasingly important, not just for setting up accounts and that sort of thing, but pointedly, how do you know who you're talking to? How do you know who's showing up for a video interview in this distributed world, this remote world we work in? How do you know? How do you really verify? And this is something governments have spent a lot of time on developing legends for deep cover assets, and North Korea is able to do this much faster with AI. So again, I wouldn't argue that this is unbelievably novel. This is stuff we've never imagined. What I would posit is that it's making these processes a lot more efficient for these actors.
Yeah, I think that's where I actually just posted a report really from one of our executive contributing writers way in from particular trust bank. And he was saying, how do you verify who you are? Are you talking to an AI? Are you talking to an AI agent? And how do you verify that? And I think, one thing that comes in mind is the impersonation. We as cybersecurity professionals have probably, many of us have heard about the incident in, what was it, in Hong Kong, where there was a Zoom call with AI generated board members that were telling the poor schmuck that was in charge of sending over $25 million for some urgent cause. And he was tricked, and he sent over that information only later to find out that this was not a real call. Nobody on the call was real on the Zoom call. So I'm real. I'm just saying, putting all in there. I know you guys are also real. So I vouch for that. But how do you prove that, right? How do you do that? Boris, Jack, what do you think?
I want to pick up on a couple of points that Trey and Jack made, and I also connected with that survey that you just did. I was extremely disappointed that we didn't get any votes for social engineering. Because the example that you just shared, Karsten, is a clear example of a couple of things, correct? So if I unpack those areas. So Trey, to your point about AI about being a 5-year-old, yes, it is. But at the same time, if humans will treat AI as a black box that can unpack and interpret React code much faster than any humans can, in their own hands, it can become very powerful very quickly. So personal first-hand example, I presented to one of the frontier LLM models, black box React TypeScript code. It can, and I'm not a programmer, correct? It can help interpret that code in a human language in about 30 seconds, correct? So yes, it does it mechanically. This is, I think, what your point is on about being 5-year-old, but at the same time, it can solve much more complicated task that any human can in a very short period of time. And yes, it can reason, and the reason I use it in double quotes, on a worldwide body of knowledge that no human could possibly keep in our heads, regardless of our proficiency level. So the second point that I wanted to highlight is the fact that many adults, I'm excluding teenagers and children from conversation for a second, continue to treat AI, LLMs, and applications as a black box. To me, it comes to be pretty strange because, yes, I understand when we treat our iPhones, tablets, smart TVs as a black boxes, those home electronics, washing machines, etc. But treating AI as a black box is very dangerous because that black box can operate our API, human language, and trigger our emotions. Unlike any other appliances, smart appliances that we use at home. So to me, it comes very strange because I went through the iterations of training IBM Watson and driving Watson to win famous Jeopardy challenge. So to me, there is that notion of me understanding, being able to see inside the black box. And that requires a unique skill set and unique mindset that unfortunately is not very highlighted and is not very prevalent on the market. There was initial marketing splash about prompt engineering and how one becomes proficient and does effective prompt engineering. My point is you cannot do effective prompt engineering treating frontier LLM models a black box. So there is an aspect of skills, correct? Being able to see inside that black box so that you can operate it well. That kind of prerequisite to achieving some of the parameters and outcomes that Trey and Jack commented on. As far as standard development, I wanted to bring audience attention to OWASP Top 10 for LLM applications 2025. So there is that work that's been in progress. Unfortunately, I do not see in press or marketing sufficient focus on standardization bodies that actually drive that attention and try to identify the vulnerabilities that may live on the edges or inside that black box. And also that work related to protecting AI that OASIS is leading. So there are some very active OASIS work groups that I would encourage audience to join and participate, because this is where that notion of identifying and being able to see that black box being carried out.
There's a question from the audience from Nathan Greenhut. I'm not sure if we can pull it up on the screen, but it's basically it's for Trey, or what do you see people making with Gen AI that's successful currently with new models, decent prompts, and adding intelligent data points? You can get answers back with reduced, no hallucinations. I get that. But generative AI is used for way more than just getting answers to questions. What other successful use cases do you see?
Yeah,
so as you said, it could be for anybody here.
Yeah. So I think I can arc Boris's response off that question. So first, Boris, I want to speak to our robot overlords and express how very welcome they are and how much I look forward to their arrival. I do speak irreverently and playfully, but they do things that accelerate our abilities. And so if we were well caffeinated, well rested, well fed, and able to focus, they can do a whole lot of things, but what they can't necessarily do is really take that and innovate. And that's what I think the human separation is that ingenuity. And so some of the great things I see happening. So I live in Austin, Texas. I'm privileged to be connected to a lot of wonderful hackers and founders and innovators. And the way that they're using AI ranges widely, right? So some of this is, we've seen a number of startups that are looking at gathering information around vulnerabilities. Kinda Security was purchased by Cisco. Well, what it did is let's dedupe, let's gather, let's identify what one patch closes all these CVEs, what one configuration changes all these CVEs. Let's game them out and say, look, what's the next most important thing? There's difficult and expensive questions and incident response, determining at what point do we feel safe restoring services? Like, are we positive we've cleaned things up? There's ways to gather telemetry and add structure to this process. That's also a high liability decision. So we want to add some structure to that. I probably have 30 or 40 hours of podcasts I download daily. I would love to consume. I can assure you, I get 20 minutes of podcast time. And so what they're doing is they're ripping those out into text, they're feeding it through an LLM, they're getting a summary, it's getting information density. Like, here's the most interesting concepts, here's some key quotes and some timestamps. Wow, that was really dense. I'm going to listen to that one tomorrow on my road trip. Like, they're doing phenomenal synopsis work that allows them to identify what's most interesting. I think the embarrassing answer to your question, Nathan, is I think everyone's starting with a chatbot because that seems to be what everyone loves to do with LLMs. But pointedly, when we start thinking about anything that we repeat, early sysadmin, early hacker lore, if I do it more than twice, I'm scripting it. With LLMs, we have the ability to turn around and ask the machine, say, hey, let's do this recurring, summarize it, give me trending information, stuff that used to take us a lot of time to do. It's doing, we just have to fact check it. The one thing I want to throw in on top of this is we're losing our ability to think critically. So my kids have the ability to say, Dad, where's lightning come from? I'm like, well, let's ask Siri. And if you remember, it wasn't so long ago, we'd have to write down our questions and go to the library and go dig through some books and we'll find our answers to our questions. It wasn't just mom and dad wanted to answer. I had to go look it up. I had to ride my bicycle half an hour to the library. Well, then we got Google and just Google it. And kids knew what that was. Now kids know to talk to Siri and Siri answers. They speak our English. They speak to us. We're in a place now where we're very vulnerable to recency bias, selection bias, all these fallacy and bias things that humans are vulnerable to. And we need to step back and ask, does this scan? And so something we've learned in aviation is we can't blindly trust our instruments. We have things that are giving us telemetry, giving us information, and we need to stop and do a sanity check saying, is this the right direction? Is this where we want to go? And have I explored this perspective faithfully from all these different angles? And we can't outsource that. That's where the ingenuity and the rational thought comes from.
I think, you've said some interesting things there, Trey, as well. When I think about that, my daughter is exactly 1 month older than the Gen 1 of the iPhone. So when I think about her life compared to our life, it is dramatically different in what is available at her fingertips. And I really like the point you made about critical thought because, and I'll tie this a little bit back to what Boris said about the AI being able to take advantage of our API. I mean, I would argue a nice Ducati will take advantage of my API too when I'm going down the highway. But it's a really interesting thing. And when you lose that critical thought, or when you have those that don't have enterprise level protection or enterprise level experience, that's where I see a real concern around AI are those mom and pops or those smaller organizations that will be subjected to what used to be, say, bot herders back when they would capture thousands and thousands of computers and then turn them on to deliver malware packages. Those were machines that were not patched. Those were our local governments. Those were our universities. Those were our small businesses. And if AI can start to take advantage of some of the social engineering or look for those exploits and unpatched machines at a rapid scale, and then operate and navigate around that in a way that would replicate an attacker, that's going to be a really interesting occurrence around the larger group of organizations that we have around. And that in turn can lead to another threat where those can then seem like legitimate outbound attacks from those organizations. Universities were especially prone to this. I remember with email spam because they were allowed such a high volume to send out. So they could send out a tremendous amount before they were shut down. What's going to be the safe harbor for AI? Where is that going to be able to live? That it's going to take longer for people to notice. So.
Yeah, and I think what you hit on is that cybersecurity and managing it is often different challenges for different size organizations, right? You know, for large organizations, you probably have already some things in place and you need some additional sophisticated tools. For smaller, mid-sized companies, they're in the eye of the beholder, right? Those are the companies that cyber bad actors and criminals like to go after because They don't think they are on the target list, and they have been recently in recent years quite a bit. And so I'm just wondering, with using AI for cybersecurity, if that could be like your superpower, if you have a 2-people cybersecurity team in your company, right? How do you manage that? Maybe with an AI that can help you on top of that with other service providers. That could be a good answer. I put another poll out there, and I'm not sure if everybody in the audience has seen it. One person that has responded. So we know that one person is using cybersecurity, so that's great. But some K2 are using it, and see if some more are coming in. So far, more using cybersecurity, AI in cybersecurity than not. So that's the good news, right? But there's still a lot to be figured out. I think Boris mentioned that earlier, that we have so many cybersecurity tools and vendors. It's in any area, data companies and cloud companies, and so it's very hard to understand what differentiates things, and some people are more uniquely positioned, but that's the everyday life of a cybersecurity professional and a decision maker, budget owners, to see what's the right solution that really can fill the gap and what's most important to us. So maybe let's move on to the next topic. So zero trust, I think, even in the AI world, is becoming more important. Before, it was already important, and now with a lot of things happening automated, right? It's important to have that monitoring in place. So it's often mentioned as gold standard for securing modern enterprises. But in your opinion, what is the biggest roadblock for companies that are adopting zero trust? Who wants to take that?
I'll start, and then I pass it to Trey and Jack. So in my first-hand experience, zero trust started as a great concept with some of the couple of first initial POCs after NIST released the reference architecture, etc. But from a practical first-hand experience, many companies continue to struggle with effective key management and key rotation. At the same time, there are new technologies coming to the market. Specifically, I work fairly closely with distributed fragmented key technology that actually makes the key management and key rotation much more effective and agile as compared to other legacy key management techniques. So I view zero trust as a kind of in a set of the stepping stones, and we still get from the first to second stepping stone before we get to really zero trust environment. On the other hand, maybe other side of the spectrum, Jack mentioned the fact that the perimeter of the enterprise and how we protect the perimeter of the enterprise continues to change. So the perimeter of enterprise shifted out with the adoption of hyperscalers and multi-cloud and cloud environment. Now the question becomes, in the age of AI, will the perimeter of the enterprise completely dissolve? Meaning that the way by which we protect the perimeter and the way by which we fragment wide area network and local area network will be based on set of routers and switches, without naming particular vendors, equipped with NVIDIA GPUs, running proprietarily trained LLM models on board that will completely change MLOps and DevSecOps type of the environment by allowing or disallowing user access to particular data set, to particular network subnets, again, based on LLMs deployed on a board of the switches. So what had started as a cloud access security brokerage type of environment and solution will get reinforced with AI, NVIDIA GPU on board running powered solution that will continue to change how we treat, how do we define, and how we protect, defend the perimeter of the enterprise. And now the perimeter is in double quotes because it may completely dissolve.
I think that's moving towards really towards the edge, right? There's all these edge devices, like you mentioned, that have built-in capabilities. You have connected cities, you have connected devices, right? I wonder, Trey, what do you think about how can companies make zero trust a reality in that that situation, and rather than just being a buzzword?
I love buzzwords. I also love that zero trust has no uniform definition. Every vendor, every analyst, every CIO, CTO, and CISO, EIO has a different definition. So first, I want to quote Wendy Nather. She's inimitable. She's absolutely got this nailed. A perimeter is defined as anywhere you're making a trust decision. That used to be sitting down at a dumb terminal connecting through a green screen to a centralized machine. We've ebbed and flowed to edge devices back and forth. Fast forward to today, the true edge has eroded. And so we've now changed what the perimeter looks like. So there's a constellation of data points we have to consider when we're making a decision. Do we grant this entity access to whatever this asset is? The right person, or in this argument, the right account from the right machine at the right time to the right asset or app or data set. And we're building a constellational data set based upon that. So I'm traveling over the holidays. I don't know, my kid steps on my laptop, it's dead. How do I work? I'm going to use my wife's or friend's computer, and have we met our trusted computing base and what exceptions need to be made? And is it going to represent a threat to the environment I'm accessing? Maybe, maybe not. So there's cascading decisions that have to be made. As a hacker, we always go to the edges, not the core where we're most defended, but we go to the edges. So we're looking for these outliers, right? With that in mind, Zero Trust Network is about informing those trade-offs. And so we're ensuring a certain level of hygiene at the edge. We're confirming through strong authentication. So we'll leave North Korea out and joke about identity proofing, but we know I'm Trey. I'm at the right machine. I've got Trey's MFA. I've got Trey's password. I'm doing all the right things. I'm coming from the right machine and meets our standards. It's now coming in to do the things. I'm expected to be accessing applications A through C. Great. I can do my job. And that's what we're moving towards. When we move towards this more ephemeral universe where we're interacting with ChatGPT or other LMs or more distributed stuff, everything's online now. And so we've got this other really weird question where, I don't know, I'm also a social security number, which strangely isn't unique, which strangely is also a username or a password, depending on which agency or organization I'm interacting with. At what point are we going to federate identity there? That's a whole other rabbit trail. That one's for whiskey at some point. God bless you guys. We'll park that. But for the sake of argument, when we start thinking about federating, moving towards a zero trust concept in a truly universal way, we're going to have to anchor identity proofing at some point. Federate the use of our identity. We'll have to talk about anonymity, but moving towards the enterprise, is your application stack prepared to do this? I mean, if you haven't seen the website SSO Tax, check it out. I think it's important to be aware of. SSO should be available everywhere. You should have SAML or OAuth absolutely everywhere. It should be easy to federate identity. Identity's hard. Identity's complicated. And then we ruin CISOs' lives with mergers and acquisitions and tucking in tech stacks that are not compatible. You had a mature program, you had a fixed budget, and here's this other problem. Enterprise security is really hard. Identity is one of the stickiest wickets there is. I love this in concept. I think it's important. If I were to tie this back to AI, and I'm sorry, I'm dominating the mic here. If I were to tie this back to AI, there's a whole lot of data that has to be parsed. And so when we think about how we look for deviation from known good behaviors, the UEB, the user entity behavior and access quadrant, has been around for, I think, 12 years, trying to tie this hypothesis that Karsten is using Karsten's account, coming from Karsten's machine, accessing Karsten's infrastructure, but his service account or his OAuth token is now behaving differently. These are deviations that are not hard to spot if you're looking at the right data and you're caffeinated, well rested. We're going to go back into that loop. but our robot overlords can help us with this. And so these are things that, with the right amount of focus, an unbelievable volume of data can be correctly parsed aggressively and then flagged. And that's what that quadrant was doing long before we had the capabilities we have now with Gen AI and agentic types of patterns. So I think there's significant value to be added here when we combine these two universes. I also expect the major platforms that deliver ZTNA offerings to integrate this and make this available.
Do you think in this this spectrum of zero trust and making sure that we have our our systems ready, we have a lot of issues with your internal systems, you have system challenges with maybe a supply chain attack, and it's not even your own patching that you're trying to keep your systems up to date, but is there an opportunity to be able to catch up maybe with AI as your helper to identify patching gaps and keeping up with all that strain?
So first, let me tie this to an M&A kind of framework. So we just bought a company. We're going to be tucking it in. I'm not speaking for my day job. This is a hypothetical. So you've bought a company, you're tucking them in. Is it easier to update and harden those machines, or is it faster and easier to ship them? Hey, welcome aboard. We're going to send you new laptops. The answer is the latter. So you at least have a trusted computing base that's going to meet your standards. Next, you're onboarding their applications. You're going to unify identity. You're going to forward their email. You're going to do a whole bunch of this stuff. That's all IT backend. Not trivial, but not nearly as hard as it used to be. Now you've got a stack of applications that may or may not be compatible with your platform. Now, behind those applications, you're speaking to supply chain attacks. And so you've got all these third-party open source library dependencies, all this other stuff. Hopefully you've verified third-party library sovereignty so you don't have to donate major applications you just bought to open source. But there's all this stuff to think about. How do we make sense of whether those applications or those environments represent a threat to the rest of our infrastructure? I think that the atomic authorizations that ZTNA offers gives us the ability to make sure, one, a uniform token isn't compromised. A lot of companies, big companies, get compromised through acquisitions and then starting trust relationships. So when you start looking at non-human identities, NHIs for service accounts, OAuth tokens, all these other things, turns out a service account that was a domain admin is now part of a trust relationship back to your main domain, and Bob's your uncle. You've had a bad couple of weeks, driving up the cost of an incident. ZTNA gives you the ability to narrow that scope, narrow that population, and identify aberration pretty quickly. But again, we're in hypothetical land, so I hope I answered your question.
Well, no, I think that's
Boris, please jump in, clarify. Like, go for it, man.
I just want to chime in quickly. So proactive versus retrospective approach is part of the question, Carsten, I think that you raised.
Mhm.
So in this day and age of AI, retrospective only approach is doomed to fail because we cannot possibly reconfigure the devices or learn the behaviors, even if we leverage in the AI to respond to rapidly emerging threats. So how do we switch in everything trade that you mentioned? How do we switch to prospective defense from retrospective defense, which now most of the security operation centers rely on, correct? So that's additional consideration. So decide to go prospective in SOC. What AI-assisted instrumentation do we need to bring or introduce or enhance in a SOC the way it exists today to pick up on these control points that Trey mentioned is additional consideration. And the third consideration is somewhat unique. There are very few companies in my experience that do not rely on off-the-shelf software that completely build in-house and operate their own middle office and back office environment, including custom-built ERP systems. What I'm saying is, if in the scenario that Trey mentioned, you happen to be a hostage of platform supplier that you fully depend on, and you cannot address those vulnerabilities without either reconfiguration or custom coding to the platform that you're buying from this business service provider, you're doomed. So in addition, Trey, what you say, there is that balance between what middle office and back office business applications do you build and fully manage in-house versus buy. And if you buy, how do you orchestrate those platforms?
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack here, and it easily spans multiple departments in an organization to make these decisions. I was wondering, maybe Jack, you're seeing that how do CISOs and CIOs build a business case for security initiatives? What metrics would they be looking at to evaluate the success of a AI-based security program?
Maybe it's time to respond to alerts with whether you're fixing that. If you're in the application security testing, maybe it's auto remediation or something of that nature that AI can start to target, configure for you. Going into the metrics and justifications, I can tell you from a friend of mine that does business continuity for a fairly large organization is that they have used, they were using a vendor and it was almost $1 million a year that they were paying for this. And they have replaced the data aggregation and interpretation that vendor provided for $20 a month through AI. So to Trey's point about grinding through this and having that focus, and Boris's point about taking something that might seem intellectually challenging and then very quickly finding a way to collaborate that, boil that down, distill it into what the most salient points are that you need to see. That's out there, and that the AI agents are doing that today. It all comes down to ROI, though, at the end of the day. So is this making things faster? Is it making more efficient?
Yeah.
And whether it's AI or crowdsourcing, are you ultimately solving those age-old challenges if I don't have enough people with the right skills that have the availability today? So that's something that's really critical where AI is going to come tying to any metric there.
Right. Yeah, I was recently speaking at CyberCon in Virginia. I was actually a keynote speaker, which was really nice to kick off the event. And one of the things that I was talking about was to see how can we use a framework, maybe like NIST AI management. And then when you measure it, I used a methodology in the past that's really beyond just AI, but all infrastructure and AI security investments is to supplement return on risk investment with a metric called return on risk mitigation, right? So, and that's really helpful where you look at it from almost like a CFO perspective. You look at, what's the impact of a breach? How many times would it happen? What's the probability? What's the cost of the control that you're implementing? And then you can side by side compare ROI and ROM, and now you're talking in the same language like our executives that we're talking to. So we have 3 minutes left, maybe some last minute advice for the audience. If there's any questions too in the Q&A, folks, feel happy to post something in there. We can either answer it now or later on offline. We come back to you.
I have one thought I'll put out there, Carson. It goes back to the metrics. And I think this is important when we're talking about the difference between enterprise and SMB or mid-market, is that the idea that a breach is going to cost you $4.5 million in some cases is something that's unfathomable for businesses. Basically, you're telling me that's more than our revenue, right? So how can I put that in context? And I found that one of the most effective metrics that our partners will use or that vendors will use is looking at it in terms of the time that they lose instead. And if you don't convert it to that, it's not tangible. It's not real. It sounds like fantasy numbers that are so big and so devastating that it's a nuclear explosion. But if you're down for a week, people can they can tangibly wrap their head around that. And that's something that they can sink their teeth into.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense with the multiple companies I've worked for, did a business impact analysis. And for example, you then classify what are your most critical systems. And for example, when I was working for a brewery, I worked for 2 brewers, beer companies. And then it means like, what does it mean if you can't produce beer for 2 weeks? Many, many $1 million of revenue lost, right? right there and then you have the attention of folks, and something has happened to like a competitor in the industry, and you don't want this to happen to us, right? But I think that's really part of the ROM analysis, to your point, right? What would it be if we would be down with these critical systems, and how can we avoid that? Maybe another quick round of last minute 1 or 2 sentences by each.
I'll start and quickly complete. So we talked about a black box. We also talked about, and I want to highlight the importance of recruiting authentic skills, and not just AI fake identities or AI agents. So we need authentic skills for the folks to be able to see inside the black box and effectively operate.
Thank you. Trey, any last words, advice for?
Yeah, I think it's important to remind the AI overlords that we welcome their approach. In all seriousness, I think it's important to take a step back and ask, how are we using this? How are we going to maximize and measure value and impact out of this? And are we taking the time to step back and ask, is this controlling or steering our thought? I mean, I don't want to go conspiracy theory, but we are vulnerable as humans to suggestion. And so taking a look at what we're asking, what it's giving back, and if we've explored all sides of a perspective. And that applies everything from in-house usage to interaction for casual interactions with these tools. I think there's phenomenal upside. I don't think that inventing the tractor ruined the farmer's life. I think it created higher value opportunities. And so how do we use this to maximize our ingenuity and our impact as we pull in folks and develop new forms of expertise?
Jack.
And I think to some degree, what is old is new again. And when I think about the perimeter dissolving, to Boris's earlier point, we talk about things like the iPhone, which you might have had a CEO show up and throw it on the CISO's table and say, make this work for me tomorrow. And so that business need that is pushing that along at that rate, I think pales in comparison to how quickly AI is propagating right now. For those smarter than I, maybe look at some of those lessons of what happened at that point and see if there's something we can learn from that will help us adopt and manage AI as it becomes ubiquitous throughout our environments.
Yeah, fully agree with that. So this session's being recorded. Folks that registered, not everybody's able to show up, but I mean, we will be able to listen to this offline. So look forward to your feedback. Thank you to our panelists. Please, for the audience, live now and listening to this later, please feel free to connect to all of us on LinkedIn and reach out, right? We're happy to be a resource for you. And I think today's discussion has really highlighted that cyber threats, especially with AI, are evolving faster than ever. So also our defenses can use automation. We can use AI-driven cybersecurity. Some of the folks that in the audience were mentioning that they're using AI in cybersecurity. We've been using it for a long time, to be honest, but I think that there's some new tools, new kids on the block. So enterprises need to move beyond and look at continuous AI-driven monitoring. I think that's one thing that we're taking out of this. And then AI-powered cybersecurity offers huge advantages, but only 35% of companies are really adopting them. That's at least the research that's out there from the Gartners of the world. And so I think what's next is for executives, if you want to deep dive deeper into the conversation and to implementing AI security solution, let's continue the conversation. For everyone, stay tuned for next webinars. Details will be coming soon. And thank you so much. And that concludes our webinar. Thank you.
Much, everyone.
Thanks for
Thanks
Very much.